Jesus! Joan! What have you done?
Frank had just driven in that day unexpectedly, but what he heard next froze his feet. It was a scream. A painful woman's scream that reverberated through the house with raw agony. Frank ran forward. He burst through the sitting room door, and there before his eyes was a sight he would never forget. His mother, Mrs. Grace, was in her wheelchair, her wrapper half burned, her skin slick with hot oil. She screamed, her voice echoed in raw pain. And there, standing with a frying pan still dripping hot oil, was his wife, Joan. "Jesus," Frank shouted. "Joan, what have you done?" Joan's face turned pale. She dropped the pan quickly on the tiled floor. The oil hissed where it spilled. It was an accident," she cried. "She rolled into me. The chair knocked me, and the oil poured." But Frank's eyes were sharp. He saw the way Joan's body stood, firm and balanced. She had not tripped. He saw the wicked look in her eyes that quickly disappeared when he entered. "Mum!" Frank bent beside his mother, his hands trembled. "Mum, talk to me. What happened?" Mrs. Grace groaned. Her voice was weak and filled with pain from the hot oil burn. "My son, the hot oil, the hot oil. She poured it on me." Frank's heart tore inside him. The pain in his mother's words was like arrows in his chest. They say, when someone enters your home, they either bring peace or plant fire. And that faithful day it began with fire. Not the kind that burns wood, but the kind that burns the heart. Before this terrible day, Mrs. Grace was no ordinary woman. Once, she had been the pride of the Port Harcourt market. People called her Iya Oniyan, the woman who could sell yam faster than rain could fall. She was strong, her voice always rang out like a bell, and her smile could make even the stingiest customers open their purse. But fate struck when she was in her early 50s. One rainy morning, while carrying a heavy load of tomatoes to the market, a careless driver lost control and knocked her down. Her spine was damaged. From that day, her legs were damaged. She became confined to a wheelchair. Frank, her only child, was just finishing university then. He cried like a baby when he saw his once powerful mother laid helpless. On that hospital bed, he had held her hand and promised, "Mum, don't cry. You carried me when I was helpless. Now it is my turn. I will never leave you to suffer alone. Everything I become in this life, I will share it with you." From that day, Mrs. Grace's wheelchair never broke her spirit. She became known for something else, her prayers and wisdom. People in the neighborhood came to her for advice. Children ran to greet her with joy. She was respected, even in her pain. Frank never forgot his mother's sacrifice. As a boy, he had seen her wake at 4 a.m., tie wrapper, and push wheelbarrows to the market just so he could attend good schools. When his father died early, Mrs. Grace had carried both roles of a mother and father on her back. Life was not easy, but Frank worked hard. He studied engineering, then ventured into the oil and gas business in Port Harcourt. At first, things were small, but as God blessed him, his business grew. Soon he became a respected billionaire in the city. Yet, even with all the money and properties, Frank's heart remained tied to his mother. Whenever people praised him for his achievements, he pointed to her and said, "This is the woman behind my crown. If you see me shine, know it is because her sweat watered me." When Frank married Joan, many people envied him. She was tall, beautiful, and always dressed like a queen. Her family was okay to some extent too, so the marriage was like a union of two powerful houses. In public, Joan looked like the perfect wife. She smiled, greeted elders, and even held Mrs. Grace's wheelchair during occasions. People clapped for her and said, "Frank is blessed indeed." But behind closed doors, Joan's heart was not clean. She secretly despised living in the same compound with her old crippled mother-in-law. She believed Mrs. Grace blocked her from controlling Frank's wealth. "She ties him with pity," Joan would murmur when no one was listening. "Every day it is about his mother, his mother. What about me?" She started small. Sometimes she would instruct the maids not to serve Mrs. Grace on time. Sometimes she would snap at her when Frank was not around. When neighbors visited, she would laugh and say, "Mrs. Grace exaggerates things. You know how old women behave," but in her eyes was fire. One day, Joan told one of her friends about Frank's mother and the way Frank treated her with so much care and her envy towards it. Her friend told her, "Then deal with the old witch." "Deal with her?" Joan asked. Her voice was low and trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "How should I do that?" The friend leaned closer. Her eyes were full of wickedness. "Look for what she loves to eat. Learn her favorite dish, prepare it for her, and pretend you want to serve her. But when she's not expecting, pour her hot oil. Let her feel pain, the kind of pain that even her son will feel too. Let him watch." Helpless Joan's eyes widened, her mind raced with the possibilities. Her lips curled into a wicked smile. "Yes, that is it," she muttered under her breath. "I'll make her feel cruel pain, the pain that no words can describe." She leaned back, imagining the scene in her mind, how Mrs. Grace's soft hands would move helplessly, her screams echoing through the house, Frank's face twisting with horror and fury. The thought made Joan's chest tighten with a strange excitement. She seemed to feel power over the woman who had always seemed untouchable, and over the son who worshipped her. She would be the one in control, even if only for a few seconds. Her friend laughed quietly at the picture of Joan's wicked imagination. "Careful, my dear," she said. "Make sure you look calm, gentle, and even loving. That's how the plan works. If anyone suspects, it will fail." Joan nodded slowly. The seed of her plan took root deep inside her heart. "I will serve her, and the oil will tell my story. Let everyone see who I am," she whispered. Her mind went silent for a moment as she imagined herself stepping over the line that no one dared cross before. From that day, Joan's patience for waiting ended. Her desire for control and jealousy burned hotter than any oil she would pour. Mrs. Grace, being deeply spiritual, noticed. She once told Frank in a quiet voice, "Son, Joan's eyes are too restless." A woman who has no patience for the old will not endure. The young Frank dismissed it then, thinking it was just suspicion. He loved his wife too much to believe in evil, but mothers see what sons do not. Mrs. Grace loved fried plantain. It was one of the few meals that gave her joy, reminding her of days in the market when she sold dodo by the roadside. That day, Joan had told the maid she would handle the frying herself. "Go to the supermarket at the junction and collect the groceries I've already paid for," she ordered, smiling sweetly. The maid left. Alone in the kitchen, Joan heated the oil until it bubbled. Her eyes were hard as stone. She fried some plantain slices, but her real plan was not to serve food. Then she carried the pan of hot oil with both hands and walked into the sitting room. The elderly woman, Mrs. Grace, was there in her wheelchair, wrapper tied neatly, watching TV. She turned her head with a smile when Joan entered. "My daughter, you brought me food," Mrs. Grace said warmly. But Joan's lips pressed tight. She stepped closer. Then, pretending to trip, she bent the pan. The oil poured, hot and unforgiving, splashing Mrs. Grace's chest and lap. "Ah!" Mrs. Grace's scream tore the air. Her hands shook, her voice loud, her pain raw. That was the sound Frank heard as he entered the compound. He ran in, and the scene froze him, his mother burning, and his wife was holding the dripping pan. "Mom!" Frank cried, holding her, his body trembled. This moment her skin was burning intensely, and the smell of hot oil filled the room. Joan stepped back, her hands shook, but her eyes were cold. "It was an accident, Frank." She rolled her chair into me. "The oil slipped. I didn't mean it," she explained, but Frank had seen the truth. He had seen the balance in her step, the calm way she held the pan. His mother's voice, weak but steady, confirmed it. "She poured it. My son, she poured it." Frank's head spun, his heart pounded. He looked at Joan again, and suddenly her beauty melted away. All he saw was a serpent. "Joan," he muttered, his voice sounding like thunder before rain. "You poured hot oil on my mother," Joan stammered. Her voice rose. "No, you don't understand. She is always, she—" Frank raised a hand. "Shut up." Tears rolled down his face as he turned to Mrs. Grace. He held her hand gently, afraid to touch her wounds. "Mum, I am here. I will not leave you. Even if the world ends, I will not leave you," he whispered. Mrs. Grace's breathing was heavy, but her eyes were full of faith. "I know, my son. I know," she whispered in the pain. Frank's rage burned inside him like fire. His hands shook as he lifted his mother gently from the wheelchair. The smell of hot oil was still strong in the air. Mrs. Grace's wrapper clung to her skin, burned in patches. She groaned in agony, her head rested on Frank's shoulder. "My goodness," Frank muttered. His voice broke, his tears wet his mother's forehead. "Who did I marry? What kind of devil is this?" He turned his head slowly toward Joan. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched so hard, a vein popped on his neck. "Joan," he said again. His voice was low but deadly. Joan stumbled back a little, pressing her palms together. "Frank, listen to me. Please, I swear I didn't mean it. I was carrying the pan, and she rolled suddenly into me." "Keep quiet," Frank roared again. His voice thundered through the house. The maids, hearing the noise, ran in from outside. One dropped the bag of groceries she had gone to collect. Their eyes widened at the scene, the steaming oil on the floor. Mrs. Grace screaming in pain in Frank's arms, and Joan trembling. "Sir," one maid cried, "what happened? Blood of Jesus." Frank didn't answer. He laid Mrs. Grace carefully on the sofa. Then he stood up. His fists tightened, his chest rose and fell like a man ready to fight. He looked at Joan again, and something inside him snapped. In one swift motion, Frank bent down and grabbed the same frying pan Joan had dropped. Oil still clung to its sides. He stormed into the kitchen, poured more oil into the pan, and set it back on the fire. The maid screamed in confusion. "Sir, please, what are you doing? Please, no." "Frank, no," Joan cried, sensing what was coming for her. Her voice shook. "You can't do this. I'm your wife." Frank's eyes were wild. "My wife? You dare call yourself my wife? A wife protects, a wife builds, a wife honors. You—" He pointed the pan at her. "You are dead in disguise." Joan fell to her knees, pleading, "Please, Frank. Forgive me, I was under pressure. Your mother makes me feel useless. Every day it is about her. Every decision you make, it is hers. I just wanted her gone, so I could have my husband to myself." Frank stared at her, his whole body trembled. "So, your solution was to pour hot oil on the woman who gave me life?" He shook his head slowly. His tears and rage mixed like fire and water. Mrs. Grace groaned from the sofa. "Frank, my son, Frank, leave her to God," but Frank's ears burned. He turned back to the pan. The oil bubbled now, popping, hissing like angry snakes. He lifted it carefully. The maid screamed. Joan crawled backward on her knees, her eyes wide, her face pale. "Frank, please, please, have mercy." But Frank stepped forward, his voice filled with pain. "If you want to know how it feels to burn, then you will taste it today." And before anyone could stop him, he tilted the pan. Hot oil spilled onto Joan's arm and part of her shoulder. "Ah!" she screamed, rolling on the floor. Her voice was loud, desperate, and piercing. The smell of her own burned skin rose. Frank dropped the pan with a clang. His chest heaved as he watched her scream too. For a moment, he felt no pity. He only remembered his mother's scream, her pain, her tears. "You wanted her to feel this," he said coldly. "Now you know the pain you gave her." The maids quickly wrapped Mrs. Grace with wet clothes and called security to bring the car. Frank lifted his mother gently again. His heart broke with every groan she made. "Hold on, Mum. Please hold on for me," he whispered as he carried her to the waiting car. Joan was still crying on the floor, clutching her arm. Her makeup was ruined, her dress half burned. For the first time since he married her, she looked nothing like the queen people praised. She looked like a fallen mask. But just then, Frank paused. His conscience wrestled. Mrs. Grace's words echoed, "Leave her to God." He turned to one of his guards. "Carry her too. Take her to another hospital. She will not die under my roof, even if she is a monster." The guard nodded reluctantly, helping Joan up. She cried in the same pain as they dragged her away. Frank entered his car with his mother. He pressed her hand against his chest. "Mum, you will not die. God forbid. You raised me too strong for me to lose you like this." At the hospital, doctors rushed to attend to Mrs. Grace. Frank paced up and down the corridor. His face was hard, but his eyes were wet. Every scream from the ward cut him deeper. He had all the money in the world, but right now he felt powerless. Meanwhile, at the second hospital, Joan tried to play victim. She told the nurses that she was a battered wife, that her husband had poured oil on her in anger. She cried, begging for sympathy. But word travels fast in Nigeria. The staff whispered. Some knew Frank, some knew Mrs. Grace. Soon the truth began to unfold. One of the maids, furious at Joan's wickedness, came forward and told the full story of what happened in the house. It was Madam that carried the pan herself. Oh. She poured hot oil on my boss's mother. My boss only returned a small portion on her body, so she'll have a taste of what she did. The nurses looked at Joan with disgust. Madam, one said sharply, you better fear God. How can you pour hot oil on a crippled old woman? What kind of heart do you have? Joan turned her face away, ashamed. Back at Mrs. Grace's hospital, Frank sat by her bed all night. He refused to leave. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, prayed aloud, and begged God to keep her alive. Mama, if anything happens to you, I swear I will never forgive myself. Please fight. Please stay with me, he whispered. Mrs. Grace, though weak, managed a smile. My son, don't cry. God will not let me die by fire. My life has been full of fire before. Hunger, poverty, suffering, but God kept me. He will keep me again. Her words gave Frank some peace, but his heart still boiled whenever he thought of Joan. Even the news soon spread quickly around Port Harcourt, with the headline, Billionaire's wife poured hot oil on crippled mother-in-law. It was the kind of gist people carried to markets, salons and offices, shaking their heads in pity and anger. Money is not everything, one woman told her neighbor. See how this Joan wanted to kill the very woman that prayed her husband into success. Another man said, thank God Frank came home that moment. If not, Mrs. Grace would have fried like a chicken and maybe even died, and nobody would have known what happened. Friends and family began to visit the hospital, bringing prayers and gifts. Mrs. Grace became even more beloved. Strangers prayed for her healing. Meanwhile, Joan's name became dirt. She was called a Jezebel. Frank stood one evening by his mother's bedside and whispered to himself, she will not escape this. Not on this earth. She will pay. He held his mother's hand gently. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms and moved men with a single word now looked like a small boy again, eyes swollen, shirt crumpled, hair unkempt. He had not left her side for days. Whenever the nurse came to change her bandages, tears would well up in his eyes. His heart tore each time she shook in pain, but he stayed, wiping her tears and whispering, God is with you. For Frank, nothing else mattered now. Not money, not business, not friends. His world had shrunk into that small ward where the only thing he prayed for was his mother's healing. 3 days later, the guard who had taken Joan to the hospital came back to report. Sir, Madam Joan has been discharged. They have treated her, but she is disturbing to go back home. Frank's jaw tightened. His mother's groans still rang in his ears, while the woman who caused it was insisting to go home like nothing happened. Even to come to the hospital and check up on the old woman she claimed she poured hot oil by mistake. He remembered the scream, the burning smell, the sight of oil on his mum's skin. His chest shook with anger, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. Let her come, he finally said, his voice heavy like rain clouds before a storm. That evening, Joan stepped into the mansion compound. She wore a long gown that covered her bandaged arm, and her eyes were swollen from tears. Her steps were slow. When she entered the sitting room, she met Frank waiting. He was seated in his late father's old wooden chair, the one Mrs. Grace had kept as a memory. That chair made Frank look like a judge. Joan fell on her knees. Frank, my husband, please, I beg you. I wronged you. I wronged Mama. The devil used me. Please, forgive me. It was all a mistake. A mistake? Joan? It was a mistake, and instead of visiting the woman you caused so much pain, you insisted on coming to stay at home while she suffer? No, it's not. You did it deliberately, and you'll do it again. Frank's face was hard and unreadable now. He stood slowly, walked toward her, then past her. His voice was low but sharp. Pack your things. Joan gasped. Frank, no, don't say that. You are my husband. Remember our vows, remember our love. Please don't throw me out. Frank turned, his eyes blazed. What love? A woman who can pour hot oil on my mother has no love in her. Mama carried me for 9 months, fed me with tears and sweat, raised me alone after my father died, and suffered crippled legs just to send me to school. And you tried to burn her alive. And you dare to say love? Joan crawled forward, clinging to his leg. Please, Frank, just one more chance. I will change. I will treat Mama like my own mother. I will serve her, I swear. But Frank pulled his leg away. His face was like stone. You had your chance the day you entered this house. You could have been a daughter to her. Instead, you chose to be a snake. You think I don't know the type of friends you keep? Now they've destroyed you. From today, you will never step into this house again. He called the guards. Pack her belongings. Throw them outside, and escort her out of my gate, Joan screamed. She begged, she cursed, she even pretended to faint. But Frank did not look at her again. His decision was final. Weeks passed. Slowly, Mrs. Grace's wounds healed. The doctors marveled at her strength. This woman has the spirit of iron, they said. Every evening, Frank wheeled her out to the garden. They would sit under one of the shades in the compound, listening to the birds. Mrs. Grace told him stories of her youth, how she sold fish by the riverside, how she carried loads heavier than her own body just to feed him. Frank listened, often with tears in his eyes. Mum, you will never suffer again in this life. As long as I breathe, your joy will be my mission, he assured the elderly woman. Mrs. Grace smiled faintly. My son, all I want is your peace. That is enough for me. Meanwhile, Joan's life collapsed. She moved into a mini apartment in one of Port Harcourt's areas. The woman who once wore lace gowns now struggled to be okay. The friends who once danced at her parties stopped answering her calls. She went to her family home, but they rejected her. Her brother spat at her feet. You are a disgrace, pouring hot oil on your own mother-in-law. You are cursed. Even her so-called bad friends that advised her to hurt her mother-in-law stayed away from her and rejected her friendship now. Joan wept. She had thought beauty and marriage into wealth would save her, but all had failed. Her burns healed, but the scars remained, and every time she looked at them, she remembered Mrs. Grace's scream, Frank's anger, and her own fall from grace. Months later, Mrs. Grace was strong again. Frank built her a special bungalow inside the compound, with wide doors, smooth tiles, low shelves, so she could move easily in her wheelchair. When she entered the new home, tears filled her eyes. Frank, my son, she whispered, you have honored me more than I deserve. May your children honor you the same way. Not long after, life brought Frank another blessing. Through a church program, he met a young woman named Stella. She was gentle, God-fearing, and known for her work with widows and orphans. Unlike Joan, she never frowned at Mrs. Grace. In fact, the first time she met her, she knelt, held her hands, and said, Mama, I am your daughter too. Mama Grace's face lit up with joy. For the first time in years, Frank saw true peace on his mother's face. Months later, Frank and Stella were married quietly. No loud parties, no noise, just family and close friends. Stella moved into the mansion, not as a queen seeking control, but as a wife and daughter who respected the crown of an old mother. The mansion, once filled with pain and betrayal, became a home of laughter again. Mrs. Grace often smiled when she heard Stella singing in the kitchen or gently rubbing her feet. Years passed. Mrs. Grace lived to see her grandchildren running around the mansion, calling her Mama. She laughed again, not with bitterness, but with the sweet relief that her prayers had been answered. As for Joan, she faded into the shadows of Port Harcourt, cursed wherever her name was mentioned. Even her so-called bad friends, who had advised her to hurt her mother-in-law, stayed away from her, rejecting her friendship everywhere. She had listened to whispers of envy and malice, and now she tasted the bitter fruit of her choices. Her wealth, beauty, and power could not protect her from the consequences of her cruelty. She had been warned, but she chose to follow bad counsel, and it led her to shame, isolation, and emptiness. Mrs. Grace's name, however, remained honored in the family, in the church, and in the community. People who heard the story ended it with proverbs. He who plots fire for another will burn in his own flame. A wife who cannot respect her husband's mother is digging her own grave. Those who lead you to harm others may be the ones who abandon you when you fall. And Frank himself often told his children, "Wealth can buy houses, but only respect and love can make a home." Listen to wisdom, not envy. A heart guided by malice will always meet its match. Lovely viewers, what do you think of Frank's decision? Do you think Frank was right to pour Joan the oil to feel the pain his mother felt? Do you think he did the right thing by taking Joan to the hospital after what she did? Was he right to throw Joan out after what she did to Mrs. Grace? Do you also believe a wife who cannot respect her husband's mother can never make a good wife? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Roots of the African Tales, because every story carries a lesson that may save another family. You can also comment where you're watching from.